Sure.
Okay, Mayor, go ahead.
All right, thank you, Scott. Well, welcome everyone to the February 15, 2022 meeting of the Edina City Council. Before calling the meeting to order, we want to let folks know this meeting is being held electronically to ensure the safety of all residents and staff during the current surge in COVID-19 cases, abating now somewhat, fortunately. And in fact, I think we'll hear Manager Neal announce tonight when we're going to be back in chambers for meetings live. Anyway, all members of the council and staff and presenters are participating from their homes or their offices. But there's a few things, as you all know, that have been watching these meetings we need to cover before we move on. The city is committed to continuing to receive and hear your input on matters. We've been collecting public input through voicemail and our engagement website, bettertogetheredina.org. You do not need to submit communication in any other way if you've used Edina or bettertogetheredina.org or posted information to the city's website in some other fashion or called. All of your communications are considered equally regardless of the way in which they were submitted. Tonight, there will be one time to call in to provide comment via telephone, and that's during the community comment portion of the agenda. You're going to be allowed to speak about anything that's not on tonight's agenda or scheduled for a future public hearing. If you want to call in for community comment to comment on something that is not on tonight's agenda or scheduled for a future public hearing, call 800-374-0221, and the conference ID is 8362839, 8362839. You'll be given 3 minutes to speak. Our city manager, Scott Neal, will be the timer. He'll let you know when you get to the 3-minute mark, and then we'll need to have you wrap up your comments. Having provided that information, let's thank everybody in advance for all the work they're doing to make this possible for not only the council and our staff, but also the people in our community. With that we'll call the meeting to order. Clerk Allison, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Anderson.
Here.
Councilmember Jackson.
Here.
Councilmember Pierce.
Here.
Councilmember Staunton.
Here.
Mayor Hovland.
Here. Next matter is the Pledge of Allegiance. I'll lead the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thanks, everyone. We are now moving on to community comment. Again, if you want to call in to address the council on a matter that's of concern to you that's not on tonight's agenda or scheduled for a future public hearing, call 800-374-0221, and the conference ID is 8362839. An operator will ask for your name, your street address. You'll get in a queue by pressing *1, and then Director Benarod will bring you in to talk to the council. A reminder, you'll have 3 minutes to speak, and Manager Neal will remind you when you hit the 3-minute mark. Director Benarod, do we have anybody waiting to speak to the council on a matter of concern to them that's not on the agenda or scheduled for a future public hearing?
Good evening, Mayor Hovland, members of the council. I do not have anyone on the call at this time. As you know, there is a brief delay with the broadcast, so I would recommend we wait a minute or so before moving on. My clock shows that it's 7:06, so I'll come back to you at 7:07. It just turned 7:07. I'll come back at 7:08 or when I have a caller, whichever is first. And I do believe Clerk Allison is trying to get your attention so we approve the agenda for the meeting as well.
That is correct. While we're waiting, Mr. Mayor, maybe we could back up and approve the meeting agenda.
Thank you. We've got a new, okay, let's do that. I don't see that. Oh, there it is. I missed it. Totally missed it. Thank you for that, Clerk Allison. We have a form of meeting agenda in front of us, colleagues. Is there anyone who wishes to modify the form of meeting agenda this evening? Is there a motion to approve the meeting agenda as shown?
So moved.
Second.
Member Jackson moves, Member Pierce seconds. Any further discussion? Roll call, please. Clerk Ellison, with respect to approval of the meeting agenda.
Councilmember Anderson,
Aye.
Councilmember Jackson,
Aye.
Councilmember Pierce,
Aye.
Councilmember Strawn,
Aye.
Maitland.
Aye. We have an approved meeting agenda. I thought something felt awkward. All right. Director Benarott, anybody come into the queue for community comment?
It is now 7:08 and I do not have any callers. Further, my operator tells me he's certain no one is trying to get in, so I think it's safe to move forward with your agenda.
All right. Thank you for that. We'll move next to the city manager's response to community comments that were made in the prior city council meeting, and there were a few, as I recall. Manager Neal?
Actually, we didn't have any community comment at our last meeting. We had other comments that I addressed, but none that were offered last meeting.
For some reason, I had in my head that one of our residents who calls in frequently had called in last week for last meeting. Thanks for that.
Mhm.
All right, we've got several items on the consent agenda. Is there anyone on the council that wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda? Hearing nothing, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as published?
So moved. Second.
Member Jackson moves. Member Pierce seconds the approval of the consent agenda. Any further discussion? Roll call, please. Clerk Ellison.
Councilmember Jackson,
Aye.
Councilmember Pierce,
Aye.
Councilmember Strawn,
Aye.
Councilmember Anderson,
Aye.
Mayor Hovland.
Aye. We have an approved consent agenda, and all the items shown thereon are adopted. Next, we're going to move on to reports and recommendations. We've got several items there. The first resolution is 2022-25, accepting donations. And is there a motion to approve resolution 2022-25?
So moved.
Member Anderson moves.
Second.
Member Pierce seconds the adoption of resolution 2022-25, which would accept donations to be made to the city of Edina. Any further discussion? Roll call, please. Clerk Ellison, with respect to resolution 2022-25.
Councilmember Pierce,
Aye.
Councilmember Strawn,
Aye.
Councilmember Anderson,
Aye.
Councilmember Jackson,
Aye.
Mayor Hovland.
Aye. We have an approved resolution 2022-25, accepting donations. A couple of nice donations this particular reporting period to the Park and Rec Department, the Edina Community Foundation, almost $7,400 for a scholarship program, which is a wonderful thing. And then the Edina Crime Prevention Fund, always so reliable and so supportive, almost $21,000 for the Fall into the Arts Festival. Those are the source of the proceeds, I think, and then they're given to the Park and Rec Department to help run the Fall into the Arts Festival. So let's move on now to item 7B, which is resolution 2022-20. And Stephanie Hawkinson, our Affordable Housing Development Manager, has this matter, which we took up at the prior meeting. Manager Hawkinson?
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Yes, as you recall, there was on February 2nd a public hearing regarding the 2022 allocation of community development block grant funds that we received from the federal government. And no one spoke at that meeting, and we posted it on Better Together Edina, and there were no comments that were provided through that medium. What the resolution is proposing is that of our estimated $150,001 allocation, that $90,001 be allocated to our continuation with the West Hennepin Affordable Housing Land Trust Homes Within Reach program, and $60,000 remain with the county for them to administer a housing rehab program for Edina residents. And the homes that would be bought and rehabbed and sold by Walt would be in Edina. So the funds would stay within the city. this allocation. So I'm seeking approval of Resolution 2022-20.
Thank you, Manager Hawkinson. Does any council member have questions for Manager Hawkinson? We discussed this thoroughly at our last meeting. That was a succinct explanation by Manager Hawkinson at this meeting. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 2022-20?
So moved.
Second.
Member Jackson moves. Member Anderson seconds the adoption of Resolution 2022-20, which would be the approval of the proposed application and allocation for the 2022 Urban Hennepin County Community Development Block Grant Program funds. Would also authorize the execution of a sub-recipient agreement with Urban Hennepin County and any third-party agreements that are necessary. Any further discussion? All right, roll call, please, with respect to resolution, the potential adoption of Resolution 2022-20. Clerk Allison.
Councilmember Staunton,
Aye.
Councilmember Anderson,
Aye.
Councilmember Jackson,
Aye.
Councilmember Pierce,
Aye.
Mayor Hovland.
Aye. Resolution 2022-20 is adopted. And now we're going on to a sketch plan review, and Director Teague has this matter. It is the sketch plan review for 4620 77th Street West in Edina. Director Teague?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, members of the council. This is, as mentioned, a sketch plan review where you're asked to provide non-binding comments on a potential future development application. This project is located in the Pentagon Park area on the north side of 77th. It would be considered phase 2 of a project that the council approved last year, the 408 unit apartment building that is currently under construction. This phase would be directly to the east of that project. It would be a 276 unit apartment, and one of the existing office buildings on the site would remain. The main feature of this proposal would be the provision of a new access to the Fred Richards Park. As you know, the current access is behind the Pentagon Park buildings. This access would come directly off of 77th. The applicant has worked with staff to locate that within this project, trying to keep existing parking spaces available for the existing office buildings while still maintaining a drive access and a sidewalk to the park. Mick Johnson has provided a review similar to any project that's located in the Greater Southdale District. Some of the highlights of his memo that were included in the packet. He likes the mixture of uses where one of the office buildings remained. He suggested adding landscaping along that new main entrance to the park, consider retail or liner buildings along the Woonerf, which would be located in between the office building that would remain and the proposed apartment. He does also recommend a reduction in the width of the Woonerf. This request would require a rezoning. The rezoning would be to Planned Unit Development 23, which was the zoning that was created on the property to the west. The plans proposed are generally consistent with those.
Hey, Carrie, you're breaking up. So if you can still hear me, turn off your camera to improve bandwidth and then continue speaking.
Director Teague, if you can hear us, you were off to a real good start.
I think he may have had Wi-Fi network issues.
I think let's give him a moment to see if he can get back to finish his director's report. Otherwise, we've got Mr. Gunsbury and Mr. Lord with us that we can shift over to them too momentarily if we need to, and then come back to Director Teague for further input and questions.
I think that's a good plan, Mr. Mayor, if you're ready
Well,
to do that.
Let's do that. Mr. Gunsbury and Mr. Lord, welcome. I noticed on the agenda that Director Teague thinks you'll need about 15 minutes or so with the council to explain what you're thinking about in phase 2 of the project. And I'll go ahead. Thanks for being with us, and please feel free to commence. You're on mute, Mr. Gunsbury.
Again, council members.
Still can't hear you.
Your sound is really poor.
Jason, why don't you start? I'm going to.
You sound like you're a great distance from us. We can barely hear you.
Far away. Well, I will start and give a presentation. Good evening, council members and mayor. Thank you for having us this evening. And I'll do my best to fill in for Director Teague until he pops back on, and I'll share a screen with our packet that I am assuming is likely in front of you, but let me know if you have a different packet in front.
We don't see anything yet, Mr. Lord. There we go.
Excellent. Well, good evening. This is a presentation where we have phase 1 under construction. And if I can go into more detail, but I think that's familiar to a lot of people on the council as well. And phase 1, and this would be a sequential project right next door to our phase 1 project that we have. And one of the exciting aspects of this project is able to accomplish a lot of different diverse items and access to the Fred Richards Park that is unlocked by this phase 2 project. I believe Kurt popped back in, so Kurt and I will pass back and forth together on these visuals. But first, I'll just sort of pause on this overall plan to showcase where a vehicular park access could be, and phase 1 project and the phase 2 project proposed. And Kurt, are you?
I'm ready. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can.
Awesome. Those AirPods are better than everything else, apparently. Okay, well, as Jason started discussing, I think you guys realize this is phase 2 of the project we recently presented to that was approved and is now under construction. Really excited to get that underway and kind of initiate the transformation of this neighborhood into kind of a mixed-use 24/7 neighborhood. As Jason was saying, we have phase 1 under construction, and it has an existing bike path designed into it that we discussed with you folks throughout the project. Bike path and pedestrian path, I should say, that enters the park directly onto the trail. And phase 2 that we're proposing right now is we're planning to knock down one of 2 existing office buildings that are on that kind of second 5-acre lot. The 4600 building will remain. It will remain an office building. It's fully occupied right now, recently improved by Hillcrest, and it will stay with many of these tenants for 20 plus years. So that building is not going anywhere. And I think that's a really important thing to kind of get in your heads. That thing is not going anywhere, all right? And because of that, it's a design constraint for us, for our access to the park, for how we use parking, for all kinds of things that we might dream about, but may not happen because that thing is not going away, okay? It also has some interesting elevations to it. As you may recall, there's a big rise. The parking lot rise, the existing kind of parking zone rises up to meet those buildings and then drops down sharply about 15 feet to the elevation of the park. We have to work with that for all of our fire access, for any handicapped accessibility, all that kind of stuff. That's another very large constraint on the site. That being said, we are planning to put in what we are calling a WUNRF in that light green arrowed area. And a WUNRF, if you're not familiar, is a Dutch term for basically a street area that doesn't have regulated traffic. With the theory being that without regulated traffic, people pay attention to each other better. There are design elements put in place to slow cars, to favor pedestrians, to really clearly demarcate where the safe places are to be in the space. Mick Johnson suggested that we actually narrow the Wooners area to make it an even more constrained space and potentially adding more green space to either side of it. We are thinking that throughout the design process, that space, that Wooner space, is going to expand and contract 50 different times, 50 different ways to accommodate the very different needs of, one, the existing office building, but two, our garage access into this space, which we know is really heavily constrained by the water table. I think you guys probably remember that as well. So we know that the Woonerf is going to be subject to lots of wonderful dreams and schemes, but it's ultimately going to have to play well with the fire department and the existing cars and our entrances and all those kind of, standard things you have with every building. Regardless, we think it's a really great idea. It's really fun, and it gives us the opportunity to activate this space really differently than anything we've done in phase one, and specifically to make it this interactive space where we could potentially have a commercial type use, playing, called a coffee shop, something like that, playing with the office space, different things happening at different hours of the day. Yep. So that's the curvy green arrow. Jason, did I handle that one okay?
Yeah, and I think one of the big things in the main design thesis of this phase two is to take the constraint of the 4600 building staying there and make that an opportunity to get 24/7 sort of life, mixed use life, and really to find a way to blend the commercial use and the residential together. And we've heard a lot of the comments from the council for the bike path and how important it was to have a park-like setting in areas of respite. So we're really keeping that between phase one and two. And then in some ways, this will build out sort of the daily, weekly access with a more sort of dynamic urban access to the park between phase two and the 4600 building in this Woonerf. And then the third phase of building out access to the park would be a new vehicular road that could be created to the east of 4600. So we're really taking a look at phase two as building out a complete network for all the different types of access. And we even like to coin it that we have 10-mile-an-hour bike access that we're building already. We could have 5-mile-an-hour plaza access between phase two and 4600. And then we have 20-mile-an-hour vehicular access as well for the park.
Jason, do you want to just shoot up to the top really quick, actually? Remember that there's that paragraph up at the top. Just want to make sure did you cover those facts with folks already?
We did talk
points
through some of the main points, yes.
Okay, awesome. Well, let me just take it from there a little bit. So one thing to remember here, you guys, is we're going to have probably 600 people living in phase one. There are 408 apartments. Many of them are 2-bedroom units. So call it 600 people conservatively. Some months it might be 700, some months 500. But let's say it's 600 people. If we put in 276 more units, we're going to have another 400 people living there. So now we're talking about 1,000 people that live on these 7.5, 8 acres, right? And it starts to tell you what's going on in this space. It's a very densely populated area of a new neighborhood. And I just want you to keep that in mind when you're asking questions and wondering who these future residents are. How do they access the space? How do they live here? We know that this building will actually be probably significantly more affordable than phase one, based on our discussions with Stephanie. We'll have, I think we're doing 10% at 50% in this one, but regardless of the official affordable, this is probably going to be also naturally more affordable just in the rate structure than phase one. And then my next point is over on that vehicular access into the Fred Richards Park. That is, and this is kind of like my point about the existing office building. Right now, that is existing parking that we can't change. We don't have a right to change it. We can't make Hillcrest do anything with it. You guys might, scream and pound about it that you want it to be more trees or something like that, but we don't have the right to change any of that. That's their property. They are open to solving this long-term access problem into the park, and our purchase of this phase two site kind of enables them to deliver on some of their original goals from way back when, from 2014 and earlier for this redevelopment of Pentagon Park. The city staff has worked with engineers, outside engineers, to come up with a plan for access into that park. we're really seeing this as a tentative and utilitarian way to gain once in a generation access into the park. So again, kind of like the Woonerf, we might all have dreams for what that grand entrance might look like, including Mick Johnson. But we may also just be really happy to walk away with a functional entrance into the park that a car can use. So I just want to kind of set expectations for that. Doesn't mean we can't do a great job. Doesn't mean we can't do small beautifully or simple beautifully, but it is definitely constrained space-wise with what we can do. And when parking lots and roads are constrained by space, we know that all kinds of other things come into play, like snowplows and drainage and all that kind of stuff. So anyhow, let's see. Jason, can you take it from here? What's our next set of questions?
So I think going into the layout and of the proposed phase 2 project, and we really wanted to build off of what we worked together and what we heard for phase 1, and continue the same setbacks and match those, and continue the same feel where the building is opening up onto the park and stepping down to the park. As Kurt mentioned, the site is much narrower, 60%. So instead of the wider U-shaped project, we somewhat ended up more with a tuning fork project, but I think that actually led us to an exciting opportunity with the site. And here you can see just transparently overlaid with the existing phase 1, how this massing would appear for the phase 2 project. Very similar with the bike path in between, and then the Woonerf between the 4,600 office building and the phase 2 project. And getting to the site plan really shows some of the exciting opportunities of doing landscape courtyards and really having access between the wings of the building. So we heard that it was really important with phase 1 to have access in the middle and to break up the building so it feels like a smaller block, feels more neighborhood and pedestrian friendly. And with this sort of tuning fork shape of phase 2, we have even more opportunity to blend some of the elevated courtyards. And they have to be elevated because, as Kurt mentioned, the water table and parking. So the parking would be all structured for the phase 2 with the smaller site, and then having that landscape mound up into the courtyards here in green, and then pulling in with the park. So it will really complete this micro block area where you could pass in between in a very natural landscape setting between the different wings of the building. The upper wing is 4 stories above the parking, and then the wing along 77th to engage and sort of reinforce the urban nature and the street wall on 77th would be a similar 7 stories to phase 1. And so here's sort of the overall massing of the phase 2 project and how it would sit on the site, with several of the trails over in between the phase 2 project, and then also the opportunities for where different programming could spill out and engage the public spaces. So we really wanted to not just blend the park into the building, but also blend sort of the residential space and the public space, and to really create dynamic areas along the Woonerf, and then also create really nice landscape pathways on the west side of the site as well. So we have a couple precedent examples on this page as well, and in your packet, of how these terraced courtyards could look and be accessible. And we did hear that was important in Mick Johnson's letter, to really make sure that those terraces were accessible and that those pathways, similar to along the bike path, to have a respite and a gathering place off of the Woonerf. And I think that's what makes really dynamic public spaces, is being able to have both the energy of movement in the space, but then also a respite and programming space off of the main public areas.
Jason, just following up on that, looking at the image on the left, I just want to talk folks through the elements that kind of naturally fit in here already. They just kind of pop up and work great. You'll see on the upper left, small dog park. We're already incorporating that. We didn't have that in the original drawings that we showed to you for phase 1, but we're incorporating that into phase 1. We can enlarge that potentially with phase 2. The second one is mature linden tree patio. There's an existing set of linden trees that are left over that we were able to save, probably about, I'd say, 3/4 of them during construction. So it's really unusual to have a stand of, or a grove of mature trees within a brand new site like this. So that's a really fun opportunity for us. And then moving further down, you'll see this kind of mounded garden courtyard idea. Not sure quite yet how that's going to work, because what that's really doing is covering up garage space below. So we don't know if, be able to get real trees on there, maybe birch trees or some other shallow root type tree could grow there. But the main idea is, how do we make this site more permeable, which is clearly a watershed goal and a watershed guideline we have to meet. But it also gives green space and airspace to what's really a much denser development than phase one. There's just not as much air and light in this development. If you look down on the lower left, it says common area patios. That's clearly a space that meets the street. Currently 77th is a very busy street, but as we populate it with more building, it becomes a more interesting street as well. And this becomes a zone where people can actually interact with our building. On the bottom right, just kind of keeping going counterclockwise, there's a potential commercial area. We don't really know how that's going to work, because commercial that's open to the public means parking, and parking is really a potential problem with a WUNRF. So we're going to kind of play with that, see what happens. Maybe it just becomes a really interactive quasi-public space. But regardless, we'd love to see it become something more than that, just because we know that with 1,000 people here, we need to add amenities. We need to add actual activity that people can take advantage of. So don't know how we're going to accomplish that, but that's definitely one of our goals. And we'll have more for that, more on that after we get through sketch. I think I covered them. Oh yeah, townhouse style units. That's a great way to wrap a garage. So we're looking at how do we incorporate that. We've done that on many previous buildings, very experienced with it. We know how to make it work. It's really a function of how do we manage fire access and all that kind of stuff to make those spaces work. Jason, what other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Kurt was mentioning, in plan how that looks, and then also I think it's really important in section, because it is the biggest balancing act is how do we provide that required parking without getting too high above the existing grade to then lose that feel of public access and lose the blending in the park. So, what we discovered as a solution for phase two is rectangular parking levels, 2 stories, and to try to compress that as much as we can in the back, to then have the grade rise up and meet some of those courtyards as well, to work with the high water table and still hide as much of the parking as we can. And then on the front facing 77th, that allows for a very engaging street presence where we can take those 2 narrow parking levels and make those 1 story, of common area space and potential commercial. So you have the right proportions along the street on 77th, and work with then housing above the 2 levels of parking that would be partially buried. And that arrangement of topography would really match with what the requirements are for the watershed to make sure we're not adding to the floodplain. So that's where it would just be a give and take throughout the whole project of where can we put the parking and how much can we mound up and engage some of the negative space courtyard areas with the surrounding site. And I think there are a lot of great examples, in Edina in different areas of WUNRFs in these pedestrian commercial areas done really well. There are also some examples, in Minneapolis of WUNRFs done very poorly as well. So we want to make sure that when we do this between 4,600 in this building, that, it's done really well and that it truly is a place where people want to linger, and that we do get those activated public space with eyes on the street where people feel safe and a 24/7 pedestrian access to the park.
Hey, Jason, one other comment that we heard earlier, including from Mick, was just the width of these kind of streets that we're creating. An urban street width is around 70, 80 feet wide, right? Plus a boulevard, plus a setback, right? That's about what we're working with here. So if you think about this as, almost a block long urban street, right? That's what we're really creating. These kind of, Jason uses the word porosity, right? We're creating porosity into the park with really these street width wide spaces, which gives you an idea of the air and light that's available to the apartments that are facing those spaces, which I think is a really important thing to keep in mind. It also makes you realize that having that relatively narrow space means we're going to have noise and activity in spaces that are really oriented primarily toward residential living, right? So whatever we do with these spaces, we're going to have to carefully manage sound control and things like that. Anyway, so that's just one more set of questions we're managing. And then one other aspect is how this building embraces 77th Street is going to be really different than how phase 1 embraced 77th Street. It's not going to have the sense of grand entrance that phase 1 has. We don't think it needs it because I think you guys would all agree that a diversity of types of buildings actually makes a far more interesting urban environment, and that's what this street is becoming. So I think it's going to play hard and contrast, quite differently against phase 1, and we think that's a good thing, and we think it's a really great example so you don't get some blocky uniform thing happening on 77th Street that's monolithic, boring, and devoid of energy. So with that, I think, Jason, any other concluding comments for the folks here?
No, I think that's, an overview of, our proposed massing and project. And I believe Director Teague was able to pop back on. So if anything I missed, I'll pass it back to Carrie as well to fill in any more details and answer any questions.
Yeah, thanks, gentlemen. Carrie, are you back with us? Director Teague?
I believe I am back.
Yes, we can hear you.
So I'm not sure where I stopped. I was about to turn it over to the applicant to make their presentation.
Well, then your timing was good. You just didn't know it.
Yep.
So we got a real thorough presentation from them, and I think I'll turn now to council members and start with Member Pierce to get his observations on the proposed project during the sketch plan review process.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's a lot just visually that I like about this, and just that first slide that you started on where you can see phase 1 under construction. You have this beautiful view of the park, and then you've got phase 2 there. Yeah. There's just something that is aesthetically pleasing to me about seeing that in that view, that overhead view. I think it seems inviting. I think it has a feel to it that I think can revitalize that area. And I think a lot of that does probably have to do with the fact that we've got a really great park there. And so the care that you're taking to incorporate that park in the design is really, really smart. And I think it will be, I think it has the opportunity to go over really well in that space. In particular, I like when I think about apartment complexes, I think a lot about what's around them and how you're able to activate around that apartment complex. And so I like the fact that there's a lot more green space. I like the incorporating pedestrian, bike trails, other modes of transportation. And I do like the vehicular plaza kind of a feel too, or not the park access, vehicular park access. And then now I have to find it. Hold on one second. In oh, no, I can't find it. Oh, I'll just keep going. So between phase 1 and phase 2 is where I was going. And so you've got a lot of area that I think can be activated and used, including the pedestrian plaza. That's what I was trying to get to as well. And so there's a lot about it that I like, and I think you should continue with the track that you're on. The one thing that I wanted to commend you on, though, because I don't know that I would say this about every developer. And so I like the fact that you've highlighted a number of potential challenges And so the one that you mentioned, like that you just mentioned, noise. And so if you're going to do all this activation, you've said a couple of times, well, you know, there are going to be residents living here, but we still want all this activity in order to keep the area vibrant. And I like the fact that you're acknowledging you have to have a balance between both. But what I would commend you on is the way that you're describing this. It actually makes me feel like you really understand what's important to residents, and you're really trying to find the right balance. And I don't think that all developers are able to convey in the way that you convey to me that you actually do care about the potential tenants in the building, as well as the community that you might be drawing into this area as well. So I think it's a great second phase, and I would just urge you to continue with the path that you're on.
Thank you, Member
Thank you
Pierce.
so much.
Yeah.
We really
And
appreciate
let's
your comments. Thank
Move
you.
to Member Anderson.
Good evening. Mr. Lord, I think, are we on your screen?
Maybe we should pull it down, and then we can go back up to individual slides if necessary.
Okay, yeah, it'd be great. Just because it's relatively small, and I know that people who may be watching are going to have trouble picking up detail, and I don't know if you could. I'm particularly interested in slide 4, if that's possible.
Jason, can you pull that up in Zoom, maybe? Zoom into it a bit? You're on mute, Jason, just so you know.
Is it possible to expand that at all? There we go. That's
Is this making it bigger?
Yes.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Yeah, I think people can see it better. I think that's what we're after here. In any event, so thanks for bringing phase 2 forward. If it's okay with you, I'm just going to ask questions and make comments along the way. I do have a few questions. The first thing I want to say, though, is I've felt for years that this area of our town is what tolerates this type of density best. So I think it's a wise choice for the site. It has great access to 177th. It flows far more freely, and it's a good choice for you. So in moving kind of back and forth between the AFO review or McJohnson's review and some of the comments that the planning commissioners gave, I thought most of them concerned the north-south runs, the accesses, the Woonert, the drive. And first thing I'd like to ask you is that one of the AFO reviews points was they'd like to bring a more of a park-like landscaping along the public access. And I wasn't clear whether you thought that was a good idea or whether you were willing to do that. And then I guess the second part of that question is, if you are, how would you anticipate Hillcrest's perspective on that matter?
Well, that's a great question. That's a big question.
Yeah.
Where we've arrived at between city staff and Hillcrest is we really can't lose a parking stall. That's what it comes down to.
No, I'm asking about the public access. No, excuse me, I wasn't clear, so pardon me. It's the public access.
The
vehicular park road.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So pardon me. So the AFO review was suggesting that more landscaping be brought along. You have a sketch which shows a pretty straightforward driveway type of access, and just the question is, based on the comments from Mr. Johnson, are you willing to bring more landscaping forward to line that and bring it forward from the park? And if you are willing, what would Hillcrest's perspective on that be?
So the main thing is this is not our property. So we actually don't have any say over what Hillcrest does or would do. Those are definitely negotiations going on between city staff and Hillcrest. The primary constraint here is parking count. And Hillcrest has said, look, we are open to doing this as long as we don't lose parking stalls. And the engineer that the city contracted with drew a plan that allows us to put in pretty much exactly this, what Jason is showing right now, without losing parking stalls. It does not allow for what I would call a grand green entrance. What it really does is allow just enough room for drive aisle, two sidewalks on either side, and an array of trees that probably aren't meant to spread too far or too big, or they'll probably topple because there's not enough earth there for them. So I'm sad that that's the answer I have for you, but I really think that's, on the flip side, I'm glad that we actually have the opportunity to even put this in place. So that's kind of the plus minus.
And I think
I'm sorry?
Oh, sorry. One of the ways that we were working, and I did pull up, I don't know if that was part of your packet as well, the city sketch for that driveway entrance, but I think that's where we thought the shortcomings of the thoroughfare, the straight shot into the park, even if we added more landscape, that still wouldn't be the natural spot for a pedestrian or a bicyclist to go. And so that's why we really thought the opportunity here, beyond trying to fit too many items in too narrow of a space, was to really make several blocks that appeal to all the different uses and really double down on the landscaping where we can do it, is a way to give that feel to the park. But we just, the dimensional constraints just don't allow for both a winding landscape path and vehicular access between 4600 and the 4500 buildings.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, can I just leave it at, you might be willing to give some attention to it to see what could be possible. There may be a way to introduce plantings of one type or the other there. It doesn't necessarily have to be a tree-lined boulevard. I understand the issues with parking, and that's frankly the reason I ask is, what can we do there that might green that up a little bit, make it a little more inviting. And I do understand
really
it's a vehicular access.
That's actually a really great comment, though. We have not talked about it because we've been focused on what the engineer drew for us. Yeah. But I think that's a really good idea to come back to, because if we take trees out and do sculpture or sculptural bushes or something like that, there's probably a way more interesting entry point that we could come up with. So really good. Thank you. Great feedback.
Thank you. And again, along these lines, a question was asked about the north side city easement, which you can more or less determine here on slide 4, along the park from the 4600 building to the east side of the proposed Woonerf. And I know that Director Teague had a comment on that at the Planning Commission sketch review, and maybe he could expand on that a little bit. So when you have vehicular access to the public parking there, and that's at the clubhouse site. So the question is, right away, we have an easement there, right away over it, and then the easement along the north side from the 4600 building to the Woonerf. Director Teague, I hope you're online here.
I am, yes. Thank you, Councilmember Anderson. We haven't worked out all the details, but I think at minimum, we would want to obtain an easement over that entire area, both where the drive aisle goes and the sidewalk, that would allow public access into the Fred Richards Park. Whether it's a swap of the existing easement that is located on the north of the buildings to the east, just how that is worked out, we still need to work on that, but at a very minimum, it would be a public access easement.
Yeah, I think the idea there is the utility of that walkway or that path, that north side easement 10 years from now, how maybe things change and how this area is used at that time. So to have that available at that time. So I'm just throwing that out because I know it's one of the many problems that you have to solve on this site. So I thank you, Director Teague, for addressing it, and just wanted to mention it. Again, staying with the north-south theme here, the one of concepts, and of course it's a good one, and we all recognize that. The AFO guidelines are pretty specific, and you've mentioned this earlier as well. So it's suggested that there's be more pedestrian-friendly engagement, a combination of residential enhancement, which you've addressed with the possibility of townhouses along your garage side, and commercial amenities, which you're also noting as a potential inclusion. It's noted that you've got 272 units there. I think it's 272. And the vehicles all have to pass through this Woonarf to gain access to the garage. So that's a lot of traffic. And then you've got your office building right there as well. So that the ideal vision of a Woonarf is going to be difficult. I think you've even mentioned that earlier. But I left my viewing of the Planning Commission review as with Commissioner Elquire. He stated, if it acts like a street, it's a street, and you may find that to be the case, and so I think that's going to need some attention. And you've touched on it, but I wonder if you'd be willing to expand on that a little bit, because that seems to be pretty important in your overall plan.
Yeah, I would say we have multiple. Oops, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So we have designed projects with dead-end streets like this. So one thing to keep in mind is this is a Woonarf that is not a through street. Whereas most Woonarfs are through streets, this is actually a relatively short dead-end street. I think the primary concern I would have if I lived here is our cars racing from the garage door to 77th, right? Because that's where the significant car count is. We're going to have, 300-400 cars coming and going out of this space. Big picture, 300 or 400 cars a day is actually a relatively low car count for a street. It's actually quite low. So they might speed even more because there are so few cars, we don't know. But I think it's up to us to design this in a way that it probably weaves a little bit. It creates, maybe we have rumble strips or other, speed bumps, things like that. Those are all things I think that we can incorporate to make people slow down. We've done it even in our garages sometimes. In our large garages, we have people speeding. So it's not unusual behavior. And I do think we can manage it through, relatively simple techniques. Lots of people have done that successfully. So I'm hopeful that we can present a design, Councilmember Anderson, that helps satisfy that question, answer that question.
That's good. That's very helpful. Thank you. I know you're considering it. Thank you. On parking. So your proposal calls for 1.3 spaces per unit. I'm just wondering how those would be allocated.
We typically do one space per bedroom plus a set number of stalls for visitors. This one is a little bit different because we have the stalls adjacent to the 4620 building also available to us. So there's a little bit of play back and forth. And again, that, how much is the Woonarf a parking lot? That would be another question about the Woonarf, right? Is it a parking lot now? Is it a recreational space? Is it a drive through to the garage? We know that it actually creates a lot of choices and options for us at different times of the day. We know that guests typically arrive in the evenings or weekends. Office people typically aren't there on evenings and weekends. So there's a very kind of, you get two uses out of those parking stalls. But in general, we're aiming for one stall per bedroom plus guest parking. The water table is going to tell us a lot about what we end up doing with that count. So hopefully we'll have enough.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds as if you're anticipating incorporating much of your visitor parking into the garage with the potential of using some of the 4600 building exterior parking along the Woonarf there as occasional visitor parking, probably at nights, weekends, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think we only need, I'm not sure about this right now, but for example, at phase one, Jason, we have, is it 25 planned guest parking stalls at phase one? So we probably need less than you might think. Go ahead, Jay, sorry.
Yeah, and that could be an opportunity as well to see, if some of the phase one stalls could work as guest stalls, or, a lot of the guest stalls might be overnight, family staying and visiting. And maybe there's a way we can discuss with, Hillcrest if that's opposite of office uses or something. There might be some flexible space in there. But we do know that parking is very tight. And also it was important in the Planning Commission that the parking is separate from the rent, because we do want to provide enough parking, but we also want to make, housing more affordable, even those beyond the designated ones, so that we hope that as this area develops, we will have more and more residents without a car, and so that they will be able to get lower prices with that parking decoupled from the housing. But as Kurt mentioned, there's a lot to be seen for how it really works. But we do know it'll be a little light on parking, but I think, with the unit mix, it will work well.
My only observation when I hear charging for parking in an affordable building, or much of it attainable in any event, and then you've got affordable housing units, and that tends to kick the cost to the occupant up, doesn't it?
Well, it would be paid one way or another. And the interesting thing with most multifamily is the parking is often heavily subsidized. It costs much more than the percentage of rent that it's charged. And I think this is, by still charging a fee for parking, it's more true to the actual cost to build the parking. And we are seeing more and more people go without cars. And particularly now there's this new electric car sharing and point to point. So 2 to 3 years from now, I'm optimistic that there'll be more options, and that we might have 5-10% choose to not have cars, and therefore have lower housing costs in this project.
Okay, thank you. How does solar fit in here?
That's a great question. Solar is tricky on these sites. We've looked at doing rooftop solar as well, but with residential, we have lots of plumbing vents and HVAC vents at a pretty regular interval with our buildings. So we did a project with solar, and it was not as efficient as a warehouse or industrial building might be, just because every bathroom and every exhaust vent has to go straight through the roof, or else you'd risk condensation. So it's something we'd certainly do a feasibility and explore to see if we could do it. I don't think it would be as large of an array as one might think, because of all the plumbing and ventilation constraints inherent with the residential and the smaller apartment sizes.
Okay.
I would add one thing to that too. We also have a solar company, Councilmember Anderson, and we've built 6 megawatts of solar in Minnesota. Part of our goal is to offset all of our housing construction with enough solar to feed electricity to all that housing construction. So right now we're at about 3,000 units of solar that we've built, but we've only built about 2,500 apartments. So it's not a direct relationship, right? It's certainly not happening on this site, but it's far cheaper to go get a marginal farm field and put down a 5-acre, 1 megawatt facility than to put in a 100 kilowatt facility on this site. Mm-hmm. It's not directly on site, that it's not power on site, but it's still very much part of who we are and how we operate. So I know that's not going to meet the letter of the hope of what you guys want to achieve, but I think off-site solar is a far more efficient way to deliver energy than on-site solar.
Okay, thank you for that. That's really all I have. Thank you so much for your presentation. I think you guys have the customer figured out here, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think you've answered most of my questions. I have to say, with slide 4, I really appreciate the dotted green lines that show the foot traffic. My eyes went to that right away, and I really helped me imagine what it's like to live there. So thank you for that. I also like the fact that this is going to be architecturally different from phase 1. I think that'll give it more of a neighborhood feel, where the different buildings have different characteristics. I would be interested in just sort of seeing what the front door is like, so that we've got that welcoming feeling. I know you mentioned it, but then there was no picture. So I know you'll come up with something good, but I want to make sure that when you're walking down the street, you feel comfortable going in the front door, especially if you aren't driving to your home in this building. Let's see. I like thinking about the setback between the buildings to be good enough for light and air and sound management, and make sure there's enough light there for the trees to grow. I appreciate that. I really like the idea, and I think, let's see, was Mr. Gunsberry said that these are going to be sort of regular street size so that you can see through to the park. And I think that's, we've got this park back there, this jewel, but you don't know it's there unless you know it's there. So I really appreciate having that window that you can look down the street and see the park and appreciate that it's there. It really brings it to life for people who are coming to visit. If it's going to be a regional park, we want people to be able to find it. So I'm really excited about the park road. So keep working on it. It took me years to figure out how to get into that park. So I'm really excited about that. Let's see. Differentiation. I think that's everything. Everybody else has had such good questions. I know the last thing I had is on the north side when it goes down to the park. How does the building engage with the park? Is it gradual? Are there steps? What's the drop off between the end of the property and the park?
That is a great question, and we've been throwing around ideas. What do you see there, kind of like in your mind's eye? I mean, I'd love to get more feedback. So what do you see happening there?
Oh, golly. Well, I assume there would be some sort of fence I don't know if you're going to have you're not going to have a pool or anything. So there's no fence to keep people out of the pool. Golly. It would be great. And I think, didn't you anticipate having some sort of restaurant down in that back corner or some sort of hospitality thing? Did I see that?
We're considering at the northeast corner is where we're looking at that, because that's where there would be access to parking.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that, because then if people are in the park and they want to stop and have a lemonade or, make a day of it, that it would be very easy to get there from the park, so that it would be kind of like the park is the yard to the building, but also that sort of idea of, if I'm going to make a day at the park, I know that I can stop at that little amenity, whatever it is, and wet my whistle, because sometimes when you're out hiking, you get thirsty, and it'd be nice to stop and get a little refreshment there. So if it had a feeling that you could see it from the park and that you could walk up there, I think that would be really neat. But I just don't know what the elevation drop off is. And I see your pictures down here in the different courtyard examples. It's all great. Just so long as you can see the park easily and feel that it's not going to be difficult for differently able people to come and go to the park. That's my primary concern. But yeah, I haven't applied my imagination. You guys are doing a great job with that. But I like the idea of feeling like you're welcome coming and going with the park. So those are my comments. Thank you very much.
That's really great feedback.
Okay,
Thank you
great.
so much, Councilmember Jackson. One just follow on to that is, I guess, for us to think about, and maybe if you guys have ideas too, how do we engage with the park planning process? Because this is a really different thing that we're doing than was originally envisioned as part of the park, right? I mean, this is clearly a big structure right on the edge of the park. So I don't know, just as a follow on to that, how do we, it's kind of mushy, wetlandy right there. It might just be a, mosquito infested lemonade stand. I don't even know. So,
well, you're aware of the Fred Richards master plan, correct?
Yes.
And, as we go forward this year, we're going to be trying to get local option sales tax to pay for that plan. And so we'll be firming up and looking at those plans and bringing them out to the public again. And that's a great point. How do we make that part of the park something that engages with the neighbors now that we're going to have neighbors? Because when it was written, there weren't neighbors there. So that's a great note to think about with our Parks Commission and just in general. How do we engage these new neighbors that are coming in?
Thank you.
So we have homework too.
Member Staunton?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, gentlemen. I'm so pleased that you guys are involved because you really get it. And it's been a joy watching you work and think about this. And from a sketch plan perspective, this is just right. It's just the right amount to give us a sense of what you're trying to accomplish. But obviously, you're identifying things that you're going to have to deal with. What I love about this is if you take kind of a step back and you see the opportunities it will create for neighboring properties. So you talk about 1,000 people that'll be in this area. You know, right about the time we get this local option sales tax, passed and we get our park going, and I could envision lots of customers for that town hall station type brew pub that we're going to put in the old clubhouse. Or, on the south side of 77th, this is going to put a lot of pressure on those properties to meet some needs that those people will have. And there's opportunities there. And so as you're thinking, I love the dotted lines that kind of snake around the property, but think about those dotted lines going off the property as well and where they're going to go both north and south. In terms of the vehicular road, I get that you don't have control over it, but maybe a way to think about it is, one option would be to think about it as almost like as a nod to the history of Fred Richards, almost like a Masters type boulevard that goes, through these trees that don't have to take up much space, but could almost create like an aisle that goes right to that park. And I love that, that option of bringing that in from 77th, and then we can put a lot of signage and that kind of thing that lets people know, we don't have to do it all on the passageway. We can do it at the end where it meets 77th, and we can kind of announce that to people. And this, I just think this is fabulous. And then the same thing as you're kind of trying to figure out how would pedestrians or cyclists get across that northeast corner where you were talking about the mosquito-infested lemonade stand. Maybe that's a pathway, and there's so much of the Fred Richards plan that is a careful balance of these passive uses and activities. And if you can kind of figure out that vibe, you can make the transition as well and pick up on that. I think it's great. I think, 77th, I just would really encourage you to think about that as it will be instead of as it is. Because I know it's a busy street and I know it's not much now, but with any luck, those people will create the opportunity to make it more kind of pedestrian and life-filled. And I like the way you guys think, and I really admire your work and keep it up. And this is a great start.
Wow. Thank you so much. High five.
I join my colleagues in saying we've been so appreciative that you've decided to take a look at Edina, and phase one is just a fabulous project. I think one of the reasons it was so successful and so well accepted is the work that all of you did with our staff, and recognize, as Member Staunton says, what you need to deliver for potential customers and for the city to be a good partner in something. And so we're really appreciative of that. And I've loved seeing those buildings come down over there on phase one. It's been difficult, but what's going to be there is going to be a fabulous product. I need a little guidance here, and maybe it can help me talk to you a little bit about some ideas. On slide 4, what's the width of that vehicular park road? Do we know?
I will pull up this separate PDF here that I believe that is 24 feet they have. And it looks like 6 and then an 11-foot boulevard on either side of that.
24-foot drive aisle with an 11-foot on each side?
11 foot on the west side and 6 foot on the east side boulevards here.
Okay. We got some possibilities there to what Member Staunton was just talking about. Maybe we can work with Hillcrest a little bit as a city to try to help figure this out a little bit more effectively. Back to slide 4, where you've got that beige color to the east of the building, it seems to reflect that your proposed new lot line would run all the way to the back of 4600 building. Is that right, or am I misreading that?
That is, no, this is only visually there to show where the Woonurf area could be.
Okay.
But no, the lot line would actually probably fall almost exactly between the two faces of the buildings because of fire setback requirements.
All right.
If that makes sense. So
Yeah,
if that's 80 feet wide, 40 on each side. Yep.
Okay, and you're thinking about two-way traffic on that Woonurf?
Yes.
Correct.
And then where do the vehicles enter the building?
That is a great question. I think the balance we're trying to strike is minimize curb cuts and not interrupt the Woonurf as much. So right now they're planned to enter right about here. I don't know if you can see my mouse right above where phase 2 is, but right in the first wing of the T in that area. But we do have a couple different concepts of where they could enter the garage. They also might be able to enter the back of the Woonurf as well, past the 4600 building that might have less interruption with 77th, and maybe connect to this park vehicular road as well. So there are a couple different ways we could do it.
Yeah, I was thinking about over where Member Staunton's living. Did you give any thought to making traffic one way so that you came in on where you have the Woonurf, and that gives you maybe a little bit more room to work with for the Woonurf, and then you loop them around the building and they come back out on the west side? And I know that interferes with what you have for a pedestrian pathway, but it strikes me that you could still have the bike trail access point there, possibly. But then, we've got a couple other places for pedestrian pathway access. Maybe on balance, create more green space and more livability, if you will, by thinking through whether it makes any sense to have one-way vehicular traffic in on the east, out on the west. No, just a thought. You guys can figure that out if that makes any sense.
That's a great idea.
That idea, but
great idea.
It's worth taking a look at anyway, possibly. I joined Member Jackson in indicating that I'm eager to see how you have the building interface with 77th, because you did a beautiful job, I think, in phase 1 of listening to what the council had to say, and under difficult grade changes, come up with an entrance that was really quite grand. But I want to make sure that there's a nice interface with phase 2 in the street as well. And then this notion of, I think Mick Johnson called it an ensemble in the neighborhood. These buildings don't need to be designed the same. They aren't. They don't need to look the same. They won't be. But having them resemble each other like they were members of the same family is not a bad thing. It's a little bit like what we have over on 70th in France with those two buildings that DJR did, where the vitamin shop is and where the where the trading company, one of the financial services companies on the other side, I think. You can tell they've got compatible materials, but they're not designed the same, but they work well together, to kind of mark an entrance. And so I know whatever you guys do there will look good, but it's just something that I think might be beneficial to not have them look too distinct from each other, but not the same. I agree with that. To the extent that it's worthwhile picking up some of those mid-century modern design elements off 4600, I don't know, but I know that's what they've done there. These things were done in the 60s. I think they did a pretty good job on 4600. So that might be something to think about as well. And then I wasn't quite clear what your ideas were when you showed those photos on the Wooner. They all had retail and people sitting outside at cafes. But Director Teague said that Mick Johnson had recommended that you consider retail on the Wooner. But I didn't hear you really respond to that. What's your view there?
Our view is maybe. A big question is parking.
Yeah.
And then, like we had said, noise. Honestly, we'd be happy to put in a $1 a year rent, small coffee shop, et cetera, in there. We just don't think that we can support actual retail because of the parking constraints. So I think we're open to it, and we're also open to just programmatically calling it an amenity that doesn't have to make money, otherwise profit the building. The question then becomes, who runs that? What kind of business is that? Is it a sustainable business? Is it something that people are actually going to use or not? It clearly has to be a direct service for people who live in the building to be frequented. So that's why we're very much about, okay, nonprofit coffee shop all day long. That's an easy fit for us. And it also helps I would say the office uses nearby. It's a fun place to walk to, et cetera. But I don't know. I don't have a great answer for you. It's a relatively small area, and we're really fighting against this parking deck that we have to create, whatever we do. So
good observation. Yep, good observation. I guess, understanding those constraints and the economics of it, I'd better see you concentrate on green space and maybe do a thorough analysis of that one way in, one way out idea and see if that enhances green space on balance. That's about it for me. I join my colleagues, as I said at the start of my comments, in telling you both that Solheim does such good work, and we're so pleased to have you here, and we're eager to see what you come back with for preliminary approval.
Well, thank you so much, Mayor Hovland. We really appreciate it, and I think, as we've said before, it's just been really eye-openingly fun to work with you guys. I know you guys are all dour, Edina. We're very clear about everything, but you're actually really clear-eyed about everything, and that's why it's so fun for us to work with you, because it lets us, ideate way more rapidly and in a way more thorough way to get to better solutions. So, thank you so much. Really enjoying it so far.
Both you and Jason, thanks for being with us tonight, Kurt.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councilmember.
Hey, good night, gentlemen.
Good night. Thank you.
Oops, I almost clicked myself out of the meeting there. All right, that completes the sketch plan review. That completes also the reports and recommendations portion of the agenda. Has anything come in from a correspondence standpoint that we need to be aware of?
No.
All right, thank you, Manager Neal.
Mm-hmm.
And then on to our modified agenda format, we're going to manage your comments.
Great, thank you, Your Honor. I have a short PowerPoint that I want to share with you tonight that is, it'll look familiar. It's a little bit about our COVID-19 data, and this is, I'm presenting this to you tonight in view of the Council's January 7th decision regarding putting our meetings back in from a kind of from a open public standpoint to a closed standpoint You agreed to do that for the month of February. And at the end of February, the decision you made on January 7th is discontinued, right? So that meeting stops. That stops at that point unless you want to continue having offsite virtual meetings go on after the end of February. I think the data I'm going to show you tonight will help you lead you to an opinion that we don't need to do that we can go back live starting March 1st. So let's take a look at this. Jim? So I just wanted to show you some of what we've been seeing in terms of change in data from January to February. I think everybody has talked a lot about how quickly the Omicron variant spiked in terms of its infection, and now we're seeing its reverse spike or decrease at a pretty rapid pace as well. This is the 7-day rolling average of new cases per 100,000 in Edina, and you can tell this has gone up very quickly from December to January, and it's dropped just as quickly within the month of February. Next. This is a comparison. We showed you this kind of data last time as well. This is a comparison between new cases per 100,000 and hospitalization. What percentage of those cases are being hospitalized? And this one takes you back to April of 2020 and gives you a couple touch points during the pandemic, so you can compare where we are today to some of the times when we had other spikes during that time as well. Next. This is a slide. I showed you a slide very much like this at our last council meeting. I think what I can show you today is that the bottom of that plunge on the far, and the big graph, which is Edina, the two smaller graphs are Richfield and Bloomington. But as you can see, that graph on the far right-hand side of the large graph, the Edina data, is plunged as quickly down almost as it went up. And that number that it's down to now is really equivalent to where we were in kind of the September timeframe. And during this, we talked a little bit, Councilmember Staunton asked, how can we use this data, or what metrics should we use to help us make decisions? We made a decision, with many other cities, that we would go back to open public meetings, open public buildings during that fall of 2021, and we had equivalent infection rates to where we are today. So I would say if we were okay with it in September of last year, we should be okay with, or we can be okay with it at this time as well. Let's move on. Again, very similar data to what we showed you last time. There was this enormous peak. This takes the data and breaks it down into age groups. The blues are the younger folks, and the yellow and red are folks that are in their 60s and 70s. And you can tell where that great spike hit us right in January, and where we are today on the far right-hand side, greatly reduced. Hospitalizations, of course, and deaths are both lagging indicators of the infection rates. So when you see infection rates plunge quickly, like we have with Omicron, you will see a delay in how that impacts hospitalizations and deaths, and this is what we're seeing. And this is percentage of COVID-19 cases by month that end up in the hospital. So you can see that has taken a small increase, but let's take a look at the scale. Remember that increase is from 2% to probably 4%. So yep, it did increase, but still it's very low. And deaths, we don't have data on deaths yet for February. So that's where we are today, with our data that we get from Bloomington Public Health. We are planning, we've had to make some decisions about how we direct boards and commissions, especially and council, in terms of where we are with advance notice of public hearings and things like that. I believe we will be safe and we will be at a level of infections and hospitalizations, et cetera, that we were last fall when we were conducting safe live meetings. And I expect that's where we ought to be starting March 1st, including our council meeting on March 1st. So unless there's another action by the council to change that, that is our default condition going forward. Happy to answer any questions.
Member Staunton.
Thanks. That's really helpful. I think that does, I like the notion of looking at the numbers and letting those guide us. And it makes sense to me to return to in-person meetings. What I would ask you to do between now and then is look at the numbers and talk about whether we should mask when we're back in chambers. I would love, just like everybody else, to stop wearing a mask when we're interacting with one another. It makes it easier to communicate. It makes it easier to develop, just to be with each other. But I also want to be mindful of whatever the trends are and see where we're at on that. So any numbers or other kind of comparables to last summer. I think when we first went back, probably in July, we did not have masks, and I can't remember when we started again, but there was some uptick or some concern that got us started again. So I would look to staff to give us some more analysis between now and March 1st on that as well.
We will. Councilmember Staunton, members of council, yes, we will do that. We will get another report from Bloomington Public Health before the March 1st council meeting. But I can also tell you it's important to remember that the infection data that we are seeing today is of a less virulent and less dangerous variant, right? So we're comparing, when I say that our data, our infection data is close today as it was to September of 21, we have to remember that was a bit more dangerous of a variant at that point compared to what we have today. So that's just something to keep in mind.
And I do think for that reason, hospitalizations are a really important number to look at and compare, because that seems to be probably a better closer to apples comparison.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Member Staunton. Member Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Manager Neal, for the numbers. Just to add on to Member Staunton's comments, I do want us to look more broadly than just coming back into chambers. And so I do think we should continually look at the numbers and assess what we should be doing across the city, because I don't want us to, as a city, to get into a situation where we're living in a perpetual state of emergency. And what I mean by that is, if you look at if you looked at the wastewater data from Met Council, there should be a way that we can look at that data and project when we might want to mask up in order to eliminate there being a huge peak. But what cities typically do is, once the peak is there, then we have the conversation about we should mask up to try to flatten that peak. And so I'm not a data analyst, but I think there's probably some insight in there that we should be using as a council to suggest when we should take certain steps far earlier on that would mitigate the risk to the community. And I also think it could help inform us of when we should potentially wear masks a lot sooner than we might have, than we have in the past, frankly. And so I would just encourage us to think more holistically about the city when we're looking at answering some of the questions that Member Staunton mentioned as well.
We'll do that.
Well, Manager Neal, what are your thoughts about our personnel, our staff interacting with the public in the homes of people, in other situations? Are you going to, what is the policy going to be there?
I think we are going to see is if we see one more drop in terms of rates and hospitalizations, we will be opening those services back up as well. So those are things like water meter replacements. They are rental inspections that were occupied units, things like that. We are looking at what those rates are for those kinds of services, and I'm pretty confident that we'll be restarting those around the March 1st deadline, or March 1st date as well.
Are council members comfortable with going back to live meetings effective the 1st of March? Seems like it. Okay, good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay. Well, Manager Neal, anything else to report?
That's all I have tonight, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Member Jackson, do you want to lead us out on comments, council comments?
I don't have any this evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Member Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This most recent, the most recent part of our meeting has me considering the challenge that leadership everywhere, as elected officials, our businesses are. It's we're clearly moving. National headlines show us this. Everybody, we're clearly moving from a pandemic context to an endemic context.
Yeah.
And we don't know, it's the transition that presents the challenge. It's the trick, if you will. It's difficult to know the right course. It's not as if, we're setting out in point A and we're going to arrive at point B having traveled X number of miles at this pace. It can't be like that. We all know that. And so we want to be, it's careful going, but it's important going, and listening to people, examining data such as we have tonight is the thing. And yet the transition, there's a psychological transition too. And we hear things, we see things, we talk to people, we see challenges, and we see emotions play out, and it'll be an interesting time. I think we're up for it, and I hope our society overall is up for it, and that our town especially is up for it. That's all I have.
All right. Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Staunton?
Nothing for me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Member Anderson?
Member Pierce.
Oh, excuse me. Member
I can
Pierce.
go twice.
Sorry, I was already thinking ahead of what I had to do here. Sorry, Member Pierce.
Nothing from me this evening, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Member Pierce. So, folks that are listening in, we had a closed session of the council, as is permitted under Minnesota statutes, to perform a performance review of our city manager. We hired Dr. Craig Waldron to conduct the performance review, and this year he concentrated primarily on interviewing the council members. Some years he'll interview both council and staff members. I think he's had some good contact with every single council member. And while we can perform that review in private or in a closed session, at the next council meeting, we have an obligation to report out under the law the salient points of the performance review that occurred. So I will tell folks that listening in, because the council members have already heard this, both from Dr. Waldron and from our own conversation with Manager Neal, that in Dr. Waldron's opinion, Edina has an exemplary city operation with an extraordinarily positive culture. And of course, for all of us, we believe that to be true, that work for the residents of our city as elected officials. And we know that at the center of all of that, incredibly positive culture is Scott Neal. And he's been a very, very effective leader. He's helped us carefully manage effectively getting back to normal or near normal. We're going back live, as you heard just a few moments ago, on March 1st to regular meetings. He's made very effective progress on his goals that he established during the year. Some of the highlights of the things that were accomplished during the year included the recruitment of some of the top talent. The most important positions in the city were filled with some very talented people, both in finance and as the leaders of our police and fire department. We also were involved this year, in the past year, in the dissolution of the volunteer fire department. Local option sales tax getting approved for $40 million for Braemar and for the Fred Richards. We get to go to the voters in November to see if they'll approve that local option sales tax for the city. We have had a year where, as Manager Neal points out, we have done some extraordinary generational financial, we've made some extraordinary generational financial accomplishments, including restructuring our street reconstruction policy. As I mentioned earlier, the Fire Relief Association dissolution and the volunteer firefighter dissolution. And then, of course, the local option sales tax for $40 million. Some of the concerns that we have coming up for the next year that he will be closely monitoring and overseeing would be dealing with crime in our community. That's a top issue for everybody in our community, including people on the council, both short-term and long-term solutions to that crime issue. And then also we've got an election year coming up, and we'll want to make sure that people understand and appreciate that our elections are completely fair, and and I think there's going to be a lot of work done to create that culture and understanding of how important the election process is and how we do it in Edina, and how doing it in Edina is the right way to run an election. The city seeks continual improvement under Scott Neal, both at the staff level and, of course, at the city council level as well. He's, on a personal basis, going to spend some time this year improving his technological skills. And I think, as most people in our community know, an indication of the high regard in which he's held by his peers and others around the state is he was named City Manager of the Year in 2021, which is an extraordinarily prestigious award in the state of Minnesota. Through all of this difficulty with COVID, we maintained our AAA bond rating. He's responsible for that and overseeing the finance department. We implemented body cameras for the police department. And on a softer side, but an extraordinarily important side, is trust. Manager Neal has the trust of the council and the staff, and that trust is reciprocal. We have an enormous amount of trust in him and the staff that work for the city, and I think that has led us to the point where we are a place that people want to do business, people want to work, and people want to live. So, Manager Neal, we thank you for another good year of performance, and to the extent my colleagues want to comment at all, they're certainly welcome to do so. Those are the general findings that we had relative to his performance review. Any of my colleagues wish to comment further? Manager Neal, we'll turn to you. We'll let you comment.
Thank you, Your Honor, and members of council. I want to tell you that I appreciate your work and your effort to do this review very much. I've got a great team of people that I get to work with here, and a great council that I get to serve in a great community. So it's a really valuable experience for me, and I'm grateful for it, and I will treat it that way going forward. So thank you very much for your support. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you. And that's all I had for this evening as well, in the mayor and council comments.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Member
Real
Jackson.
briefly, I just wanted to share one thing that Dr. Waldron said, and that is that this culture of trust also helps to recruit talent and really good people, especially in these times when it's hard to get people. That was something that set us apart, and I thought was a really significant point that he made.
Thank you for that. I guess one other thing to just let people know about is we're only about 2 weeks away from the State of the Community that we'll do with Dr. Stanley on the 1st of March at noon at Edina Country Club. So just a reminder to everybody that's listening in, March 1st, Edina Country Club. You don't have to buy lunch. You can just come and take part in the State of the Community led off by Dr. Stanley, who then has to hit the road for a meeting outside of the state, and then the city will wrap up following her presentation. So that's it for me. Did that cause anyone else on the council to think of anything else they wanted to share? All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Member Staunton moves, Member Pierce seconds, or was that Member Anderson?
Second.
Member Staunton moves, Member Pierce seconds. Any further discussion? Roll call, please, with respect to the motion to adjourn.
Councilmember Anderson.
Aye.
Councilmember.
Oops, we couldn't hear you.
Sorry. Councilmember Jackson.
Aye.
Councilmember Pierce.
Aye.
Councilmember Staunton.
Aye.
Mayor Hovland.
Aye. We stand adjourned.
Good night.
Night.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Yep.